Well, good evening, church family. I pray that you're doing well and that your week is going strong. We are in the midst of a new study entitled Things I Wish Jesus Didn't Say. And this week, our passage is one that is riveting. It's interesting. It is one that pushes us to really think through what it is that God would have us to do about the things that separate us from God. This week, our passage is Matthew chapter 5, verse 29. And it says, "If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away." If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It's an interesting statement that Jesus makes, and he makes it because too often we allow those things that would prevent us from full fellowship with Jesus Christ, and those things that will prevent us from having a thriving and a growing relationship with him, to remain in our lives and to exist without us uprooting them and removing them, to the end that we might be more free to grow into the likeness of Jesus Christ. Now, let me say, what Jesus is saying in this passage is not to be taken literally. He's not saying to gouge out your eye, to cut off your hand, to slice off your ear. It's a metaphorical statement related to totally removing the things which cause us to sin. What is sin? Sin is anything that separates you from God. Sin is anything that causes you to be less than what God intends for you to be. Sin is anything that blocks your or my capacity to grow into the very likeness of Jesus. So when we talk about sin, we're talking about attitudes, habits, behaviors that make me less than what God would have me to be, and that causes me to be obscured rather than looking more like Jesus Christ. Remember that there is one goal of the Christian, that is to reflect Jesus Christ, that is to look like Jesus. And in our effort to look like Jesus, we are to remove anything that would prevent us from growing into the image of Christ. So here, when Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away, he's saying that because sin has a corrosive effect on us. Sin is a literal problem in our world. Now, what's the issue? Well, number one, the issue is sin wants to consume us. And so when Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away, he's saying it that because sin, if you allow it to stay, it always grows. Sin is never confined to one singular small area. Sin grows. It wants to consume us. It wants to consume every part of us, everything about us. It wants to totally take over our lives and cause us to be less than what God has created for us to be. Sin always has a way of distracting us. So it causes us, instead of being focused on the things of God, focused on the purpose that God has placed on our lives, instead of our being focused on the work that God has called us to do, we become distracted by sin. That's why sin is always something that we like. It's something that we enjoy. It's something that we revel in. Sin is never is never dreary. I've never met a sin that I didn't like. Why was that? Because sin is designed to distract us. What did Paul say? This one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind me, I press forward to that which lies ahead. Paul was singular in its focus. In Hebrews, it says that you and I must lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. That's in Hebrews. And why must we do that? We must run the race that's set before us. But we can't run the race if we are distracted because of sin. So when Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away, he's saying that because sin is always meant to distract us. Sin is always meant to cause us to look away from the direction that God has for us, to become involved in that which will take our time, will take our energy, will rob us of focus, will rob of commitment. Those things distract us, and he doesn't want us to do that. And so he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, you need to gouge it out and throw it away. But then he says that the issue here that we need to do that because sin has a habit of distorting us. It distorts us. So sin begins to mar the character. It begins to mar the behavior, and it causes us to be less than what we have to be. And we have to be mindful of the tricks of the enemy when we begin to act in ways that's less than our highest selves. God wants us to live at our highest realm of being. And if you're not careful, you'll begin to be pulled down into your lowest self. Well, why is that? It's because sin distorts us. It distorts the character. Sin distorts your perspective. Sin distorts your ability to see what it really is. And you begin to say, well, they deserved me going off like that. And you begin to say, well, you know, I can steal that. I can take that because, you know, they ought to be paying me more anyways. And you begin to think that you can do whatever you want and you can rationalize it. And before you know it, your character is distorted. The way you see the world is distorted because sin always distorts us. So Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, if that thing causes you to be less than what God has called you to be, if that is causing you to move away from what God would have you to be, you need to cut it out and throw it away. And I don't like this saying of Jesus. Why? Because I like sin. Like sin. Everybody likes sin. That's why it's so difficult for us to give up sin. But Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, you need to gouge it out and throw it away. You gouge it out and throw it away because you don't want to be distracted. You gouge it out and throw it away because you don't want to be distorted. But then you gouge it out and you throw it away because sin, if we will allow it, can defeat us. Sin can take you further than you want to go. It can cause you to stay longer than you intend to stay. It can do more damage that will cost you more than you ever wanted to pay. It can be defeating. And Jesus says, I want you to be victorious. I don't want you to be defeated. I want you to be above. I don't want you to be beneath. I want you to be empowered. I don't want you to always be at a deficit. And if you're going to be victorious, if you're going to be empowered, if you're going to be above, you've got to identify the sin in your life. What is sin again? Sin is anything that separates us from God. What is sin? Sin is anything that provides a barrier for us becoming and growing into the likeness of Jesus Christ. What is our goal? Why didn't God take us to heaven right after we were saved? It's because we are to grow into the likeness of Jesus Christ. And sin can get in the way. And when sin gets in the way, you've got to dig it up, throw it out. Greed, envy, jealousy, myopia, a lack of love, hatred, stinginess. You've got to pluck them up, throw them out. Remember that sin is not just things related to sexuality or things related to drunkenness or things related to, all of those categories that we like to quote in church. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And all of us struggle with sin. And my sin today may not be my sin that I struggled with on yesterday, but yet I struggle with sin, and I've got to identify whatever is beneath the character of Christ in my life and say, hey, I've got to root that out. I've got to throw it away, because it's preventing me from being who God is calling me to be. God is calling me to live in the likeness of Jesus Christ. He's calling me to be the hands and the feet of Jesus Christ. And I can't do that if I'm encumbered with sin that weighs me down. Sin does what? It distorts our perspective. Sin does what? It distracts us from purpose. But then sin defeats us personally. And so Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away. And when you do that, you'll discover that you and I can become more like Jesus Christ in a way that makes us larger, in a way that makes us more powerful and more impactful in our world today. So in your small groups this week, I want you to answer 3 questions. The first question is a question personally. What are the sins that entangle me? What do I need to root out? Secondly, what are the things that I may overlook in my character that might be keeping me from being all that God would have me to be? And thirdly, what are the steps that I need to take to root up and throw away? Have a good conversation this week. Love you. Talk to you soon.